Hi folks, Florida Man here. Today, I bring you an after-action report on a game called Johnnie Walker Green Label, which was played on the Ancient Med map on PlayDiplomacy.com. To refresh your memories on this ancient Mediterranean map, it's based on the ancient Mediterranean world. As you'd expect from the name, the game begins in the BC era, in the year 400. There are 5 powers, and they are Rome, Carthage, Persia, Greece, and Egypt. For everyone who can see in color and isn't familiar with ancient geography, Rome is the orange one, Carthage is blue, Persia is purple, Greece is green, and Egypt is a shade of yellow. In this game, I played as Rome. In spring 400 BC, I negotiated friendly relations with both Carthage and Greece, hoping to have my choice of enemy after the year ended. We had some neutrals amongst the 3 of us, so I secured their respective agreements on which neutrals we'd each get. Both of them moved more or less as I expected, which left each of us positioned to get 3 neutrals in the first year, and neither of them positioned to go after me early on. So far, so good. With the arrival of fall, Carthage and Greece both moved in ways that continued to be as expected in the areas they shared with me, and they interestingly also both moved in ways that kept Egypt out of 2 neutral centers that Egypt was surely hoping to acquire. Egypt was kept from acquiring Leptis and Crete, although this also kept Greece from acquiring his 3rd neutral. Persia also seemed to be moving against Egypt, as one of his armies moved south, whereas it would have been possible for Persia to capture Chersonesus, although it would have been a slightly riskier effort than what Persia actually did, if Persia had wanted to move against Greece. With the build phase, I made my decision to go after Greece first and try to maintain good relations with Carthage. I built an army to take the neutral that Greece and I had agreed would be his, and 2 fleets, because Ancient Med is an extremely naval map in any case. Carthage built 2 fleets and an army, which I made sure to communicate about, because those fleets could be used against me just as easily as against Egypt. Carthage reassuringly convinced me of his good intentions. Greece built 2 fleets, which left the neutral center of Dalmatia as vulnerable to my forces as it could possibly be. For me, this Greek gesture of trust was essentially a green light for my stab. There would never be a better opportunity to launch a land invasion of Greece. Persia built 2 fleets and an army, which I took to be an anti-Egyptian choice. If Persia wanted to go against Greece, that's one war where 2 armies might have made more sense than 2 fleets. Whereas against Egypt, there's only a thin strip of land that can connect Persian armies to the Egyptian homeland. In spring 399 BC, Carthage and I made defensive movements relative to each other, and Carthage also positioned to acquire another neutral that was in our shared border region. But to my relief, we also both moved to attack our expressed enemies. I moved toward Greek-controlled Dalmatia, while Carthage launched a large-scale land invasion of Egypt, using 4 of the 6 Carthaginian units. Very unfortunately for Egypt, Persia was moving against him as well. Greece, meanwhile, moved fleets in a way that could go after Persia or me, while the Greek armies moved in my direction. In the fall, Carthage and Persia both continued advancing against Egypt, while Greece and Persia bounced in 2 key centers in their border region. Greece captured Chersonesus, which would give him a good space from which to advance into Persia over land. I took Dalmatia as planned. In the build phase, Greece, Carthage, and I all acquired fleets, while Persia built an army. Greece and I had made a very quick peace agreement at this point. Greece, surprisingly easily, promised to become my janissary, in exchange for me not crushing him like a cockroach at this point. I agreed to this, thinking I could really use the Greeks as a solid anti-Persian shield and a source of occasional centers. If you can acquire a good janissary, that's always a gift. In spring 398, as a result of my peace with Greece, I moved all of my units against Carthage, which, you can tell by looking, Carthage did not see coming. He continued to move everything he had against Egypt, leaving Carthage itself completely undefended. It felt like I had chosen my moment well, since Carthage was thoroughly embroiled in this war, while I hoped Greece and Persia would be distracted with each other. Fall 398, I captured Carthage and surrounded the Carthaginian homeland by sea. Carthage had captured Thebes from Egypt, but he wouldn't get any builds thanks to my offensive. Greece had moved everything away from me, and Persia had almost completely finished Egypt off, meaning he'd have to commit to fighting Greece unless he wanted to launch an inefficient land invasion of Carthage. In the build phase, I got a new fleet, as did Greece, while Persia got a fleet and an army. Spring 397, my plan continued to succeed. I took another Carthaginian home center, unexpectedly, as well as capturing Saguntum, the Carthaginian foothold in Europe. Greece continued to attack Persia, Carthage remained divided between the fight with me and the distraction of Egypt, and Persia seemed to fight very inefficiently against what I thought was my Greek proxy. I also advanced from Dalmatia to Illyria in Greece, which I figured would enable me to take a Greek center or two when the opportunity arose, as well as leaving me, for the moment, still positioned well enough to defend either Dalmatia or Vindobona. Fall 397, Carthage and I continued to fight. Carthage finally finished Egypt off, and Persia continued to give ground to Greece, although Persia also took Chersonesus. At the same time, unfortunately, I chose to move from Illyria to Dacia. The reason why this is unfortunate is that the result during the retreat phase is Greece is able to retreat Chersonesus into Sarmatia, putting a Greek army next to one of my unoccupied centers. In the build phase, Greece built a new army in Macedonia, and suddenly I had the sinking feeling that I no longer had a janissary. I could see the writing on the wall, and I built an army in Ravenna and a fleet in Neapolis at the same time, so I felt I had a shot at defending against the Greeks. However, in spring 396, both Greek and Persian units moved west. The enemies who I had thought were fighting before suddenly seemed to be moving in unison. I also found my offensive against Carthage was stalling out, and so, adding insult to injury, I felt that I had to make a hasty peace with him. In fall 396, I moved almost every unit I could away from Carthage and towards the enemies to the east, and Carthage thankfully kept faith with me and also moved his available units against the Persians. Unfortunately, the Greco-Persian force at this point had the advantage of position and momentum, and they had just begun to have the advantage of numbers. Looking to the build phase, neither Carthage nor myself had new units to build, but the Greeks put 2 new fleets right next to the front lines. In another indicator of the advantage our enemies had, you can look to the central 4 sea spaces: Ausonian Sea, Gulf of Tekape, Messenian Sea, and Libyan Sea. The enemy controlled 2 of those spaces, while we controlled 1, and the other was vacant. This was a subtle disadvantage, but all the disadvantages would be cumulative. There was already a Persian unit behind my lines. They outnumbered us, as mentioned before, and their units were better positioned around the front lines generally, albeit mostly due to their first-mover advantage. But frequently in diplomacy, the one who moves first is the one who wins. Looking to spring 395, you can add to that list of problems the fact that Carthage and I didn't trust each other completely, and therefore we didn't completely move away from each other's borders, even while we were engaged in this major war that would decide the game. In fact, as you see in fall, Carthage actually begins to join in the attack on me at this point, hoping to become the third partner in the draw. So I'm pretty much screwed. Carthage doesn't get the last laugh either, though. As it turns out, the Greeks and Persians are committed to a 2-power draw with each other, and they became committed to that at some point around when they both attacked me together in the middle game. This is a resolution they ultimately pursue all the way to the desired end, in what I would argue is a rather unexciting ending to a game. I tried to induce a betrayal near the end game, hoping that if I couldn't be one of the partners to the draw, at least I could prevent one of my attackers from being a winner. That was why I never agreed to a draw that excluded me, which could have ended the game early, rather than prolonging my suffering. I was hoping that I could get one of them to betray the other before I died. However, I was unsuccessful. If you look at these final seasons, you can tell there were opportunities for them to stab each other, and indeed, the final map shows some places where either one could stab the other and secure the solo, since only one center would need to change hands. The advantage if they had decided to fight it out would be with Greece, but they both chose to content themselves with the 2-power draw. Again, I do think that's one of the less exciting ways to conclude a game, by grinding the other powers down with a long-lasting 2-person alliance that crushes everything under its weight after the mid-game, but I don't know that I'm really in the position to criticize. They both beat me, after all. The moral of the story, folks, is to beware of Greeks bearing gifts. I hope you enjoyed this after-action report. If you liked it, consider showing it with your likes, comments, subscribes, and maybe support on Patreon, like half of the people whose names are now on screen. We also appreciate comments, which boost the videos in the algorithm and make it more likely that fellow diplomacy fans will discover Florida Man Diplomacy. Until next time, Florida Man out.